red-haired boy sat silent in my brother's chair. Voices swarmed his hollow eyes, tracking me. Denial hushed the room, but not the phantom weight of his stare. I am the fourth child in a family of 8, so you can imagine we had a very busy home. It was a rare and precious occasion to find myself alone for the evening. Everyone was gone to my older brother's football game, and for some unknown reason, I decided not to go out with my friends. There was no ghostly fog that evening, no storm or unusual feeling about. Being 15, I was always hungry, so I made myself a sandwich and headed downstairs for a little TV. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I immediately felt something was wrong. I wasn't really afraid, it was more like Spider-Man must feel when his spider sense is tingling. I felt acutely aware of everything around me. When I entered the family room, the feeling increased and I became aware of voices around the room. I could not understand a word that was said, but they were human voices nonetheless. Perhaps at this point I should tell you a little geography of the room. When you entered, there was a desk and computer immediately to your right. Straight ahead, there was a chair with its back to the door, and the sofa sat to the right of the chair, forming an L that faced the TV on the other side of the room. I walked around the chair on my way to the sofa when I saw a boy about 2 years younger than me sitting in the chair. He had pale skin and tousled red hair. His head followed me as I walked to the sofa, as though he could see me. Probably the strangest part of this whole experience was how I reacted to this intruder. I knew that this was not a break-in and that he was not a member of my family, but in my mind I began to fabricate a rational explanation. I sat down on the sofa and addressed the being as my little brother, who incidentally also has red hair. I asked him what he was watching and began to watch the blank TV screen, expecting to see a program. The intruder stared at me with a blank expression on his face but never said a word. Finally, accepting that I was sitting next to a ghost and that other entities were in the room as well, for I could still hear them louder than ever, fear overtook me. I closed my eyes and repeated in my mind, "This is not happening." At that moment, the voices stopped. I opened my eyes and was alone. For a moment, I felt the hair on my neck standing on end. When that subsided, it was like nothing had happened. There was no evidence to suggest he was ever there. If you ask me if I believe in ghosts, I will tell you full-heartedly, yes. As for all true ghost stories, I believe it is up to the one who experiences it to decide if it was real or imagination. Midnight watches in that creaking clinic. Jimmy's ghost rode elevators, slammed doors, rang phones no living soul could touch. I still wonder who dialed my desk that night. While in the Navy from 1994-1999, I worked at Branch Medical Clinic, 1017 Recruit Training Command, Great Lakes. The building had 3 floors and a basement, which was really spooky. One half was used for medical and the other for dental. It was an older building, and as the story goes, it was used as the hospital for the command during World War II and was supposedly haunted by a ghost which everyone called Jimmy. Anything strange that went on was blamed on him. Now, how accurate? This is, I am not sure, but that is what everyone who was new on board was told. All the junior enlisted had to take turns doing a week of midnights for fire and security, and to greet the new recruit divisions in the early morning hours before anyone was there. Being that I had worked there so long, I ended up having to do this watch a couple of times. The first week was kind of spooky, but nothing ever really happened to really scare me. Well, time went on and it had come around for my turn again. The first few nights went by and nothing happened except for the occasional elevator going up and down floors by itself with no one getting on or off. Kinda spooky, like I said before, but nothing to really scare me. The last night I was there is when the really strange stuff started happening. It started with the usual elevator tricks, and I thought to myself, big deal, I've been seeing that all week. As the night went on, though, more and more things started happening. First, I started hearing doors slamming open and shut. I looked around the building, scared out of my mind, but could not find anything or any unsecured doors. So I went back to the front desk and continued with my work. Then the phone started ringing in the department head's office next to the front desk. Now I know you're saying to yourself, big deal, so the phones are ringing, but the phone system that we had could be used to make outgoing calls or to call specific phone extensions, comm lines, in the building. These comm lines could only be dialed from inside the building. And since I was the only one in the building, this really scared me. I knew that I hadn't dialed the number, nor would I have had any reason to dial it since, like I said, there was no one else there. The only explanation I could come up with was our supposed ghost friend, Jimmy. I don't know if anybody else had experiences with him, and I never asked. All I know is what happened to me, and thankfully I never had to do another week of midnights after that. Well, that's my story. Sorry it was so long. If anybody else out there ever worked at Branch Medical Clinic 1017 and had any strange experiences with Jimmy, please let me know. Two weeks after the bullets, Jesse's stage hummed with more than music. Invisible fists struck my spine, vengeance for the 357 on my hip. The dead don't forget, but they let the guns stay. I was thinking about this group the other day and recalled this encounter that happened to me many years ago. It was either 1975 or 1976. I want to think it was 1976. People from the neighborhood in question will remember because the experience is born of a triple murder on a Saturday night in a nightclub that was once known as Jesse's Place in Indianapolis. One summer Saturday night, Sunday morning, the owner and his pregnant wife were robbed and gunned down in the back room. Man, woman, and unborn child died as a result. The club hasn't been known by this name for years, but it is located at Washington and Ritter in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was there for more than a year after my encounter and never had a second one. I don't know if anyone else has had encounters at this address. My group had been in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we just got back to play the engagement at Jesse's Place the week after the shooting. It was not a very good feeling to be there. I could feel the presence of tragedy, but all went okay except that business was slow, but something special happened to me on the first Saturday night we were there. The stage was set up against the wall on the long side of the room. The wall was composed of concrete block. There were no windows or doors on this west wall. I am a guitar player. I had my amplifier sitting on a chair placed against the wall, and I stood a few feet in front of it. Joe played the steel guitar, and he was set up just like me on my left. I was standing by the edge of the stage on the south end of it. I neglected to mention that the murders were done by a pistol. Being in the presence of occasional trouble, I kept a .357 Magnum revolver in the back of my amplifier. On the first Saturday night of our engagement, 2 weeks after the killing, all was well until about 2 a.m. It was very strange. It felt as though something brushed against my back, down around my belt. I looked to my left and saw that Joe the guitar player was still several feet away from me, still sitting at the steel. We were playing a song at the time. There was no one even near to me. A few seconds later, I felt something brush against me again, and then, whatever it was, hit me real hard, right above my belt and in the center of my back. I recoiled forward and nearly fell down. I looked over at Joe and he was looking over at me, wondering what the hell my problem was. It is a strange feeling to get clobbered by thin air. I saw and heard no one. The best I can figure, the spirits of the victims were not pleased that I carried a big pistol with me. I have always been on the side of the law and am not a violent person. However, that did not seem to matter to them. I told them that the gun was for whoever would come back to kill again. I never had another encounter as long as I played there. We stayed 2 weeks and left, coming back a few months later to work there for more than a year when the place became Buffalo Bill's. This story is true to the best of my knowledge. I have only left off the names of those involved. Before I became a science teacher, I was an air traffic controls specialist in the US Navy. I was stationed at an airfield from 1984-1990, during which I spent numerous hours in the control tower on mid-watches from 10:00 p.m. 6:30 a.m. Most of the time I was there, we would have 2 people in the tower during these hours, even though we did have a couple of periods where only 1 person was in the tower on mids. The only restroom was located directly below the tower on the 4th floor landing. I always felt uncomfortable going into there at night. Actually, it wasn't the restroom as much as it was the 4th floor landing itself. I blew it off most of the time as my imagination because the 4th floor landing was poorly lighted. Many times I heard the door to the tower open and close. The funny thing is that the door, which is on the 4th floor landing, is controlled by a 5-button electric cipher lock which makes a very distinctive snap when the door is opened. Also, only controllers are given the combination. If I was talking to airplanes, I wouldn't bother to look to see who was there. Sometimes it was another controller, and sometimes nobody came up the ladder. A couple of times I heard footsteps. Coming up the ladder, it has steel steps, which would stop in the tower cab itself, about 8 feet behind me. The other thing that I heard was the toilet flushing when there was nobody in the restroom below. There were only 3 other people in the building, and they had a bathroom 4 floors below. Still, I blew it off as my imagination working overtime in a post-World War II building. I found out that it was not just my imagination. One mid-watch. In 1987, I was standing watch with a 20-year veteran controller who had completed 2 tours at the site, 10 years total. We were doing the end-of-the-day paperwork when I heard the cipher lock snap, the door open, and the footsteps up the ladder, stopping in the tower cab. I turned to see who was coming up at the same time. The other controller turned around to do the same. There was nobody there. The other controller looked at me and smiled, and I smiled back at him. We did not say a word, but both turned back around and went right back to what we were doing. I never discussed any of this with any controllers because we all have to meet physical standards annually, which also means we have to be mentally competent. Controllers who see UFOs and/or ghosts in the tower don't control too long. One night I was in radar and another controller was in the tower by himself. I heard the other radar controller teasing the tower controller over the coordination phone line about being afraid of the tower ghost. The tower controller was getting angry and demanding that we send someone up to keep him company. I asked the other radar controller jokingly about this tower ghost. I did not let on that I had ever experienced a thing. The radar controller acted like I was daft. "Haven't you ever heard the toilet flushing and the door opening?" he said. I still played dumb. He went on that this happened often with the guy who was up there at the moment, and that he did not want to ever have to stay up there by himself. The other radar controller continued to relate the exact same events that I had heard on many nights. I asked a few other controllers, and a few of them came clean with their own stories, while others either seemed to be playing dumb or outright stated that it was just people's imaginations running wild. None of the old-timers at the airport ever knew of a controller who died while stationed there, but there have been many crashes of aircraft. One controller said the ghost was one of the pilots who died in 1984, 6 months before I got there, when a ground controller made a fatal error resulting in a collision between a departing A7 and an S3 that was crossing the runway. One person died in the A7 and I think 4 people died in the S3. The story was that there was a pissed-off pilot looking for AC-1XXX. Of course, this part is conjecture, and I would ask, then why does the pilot stopped off to relieve himself from time to time?